Hi, I'm Halise Lieberman, the director of the Toby Center for Jewish Life and Learning in Warsaw, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of TJHTalks. I'm delighted to welcome our partners, the new Lehrhaus and the Toby Department for Jewish Studies at Wrocław University. As usual, or for those of you who are new, let me repeat how we will move forward. We have our three guests will have about a 45-minute conversation, and it will be followed by an opportunity to take several questions from you. So if you'd like to put in a question or tell us where you're joining us from or make a comment, please do so in the chat session. And so now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to Professor Marcin Wodziński. Marcin.
Hi, hello. Thank you, but I believe we should start with David Biale, with our first speaker, who will be the first to present. I will be at the very end of the turn, right? How do we arrange it?
That sounds good, but stay with us, Marcin. You're going to pull it all together. So, David, first of all, Marcin, welcome. David, we're delighted to have you and new Lehrhaus.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for organizing this. And New Lehrhaus here in the San Francisco Bay Area is very pleased to be a partner. Okay, should I start? I'm ready to go. Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. It will be very good.
Very good, very good. Okay, so welcome everybody. You know, when I teach students who know very little about Judaism, even, you know, students who are not Jewish, and I say to them, what do you know about Hasidism? And they look at me as if I'm speaking about the moon. But then when I say, you know, these guys in Brooklyn who have long black coats and fur hats, immediately they recognize what we're talking about. So the Hasidim are very well known, and yet at the same time, very, very little is really known about them. What I would like to present today, very briefly, are some of the conclusions of the book whose cover you see here, Hasidism, A New History, written by 8 scholars. I was privileged to be the project director of Hasidism, A New History. And what we attempted to do was to bring together all of the scholarship as of the 2010s. The book was published in 2018. So it really summarizes the scholarship to that date. Of course, scholarship never stops and it continues. And so we're very privileged to have with us today 2 scholars, one from the project and one not from the project, who are advancing the study of the field. We, in the project, 4 of us were senior scholars, 2 sort of mid-career, and 2 junior who had just finished their PhD. So we tried to bring together a range of ages, of time in the field, 2 of us American, 1 Polish, and the rest Israeli. So our project, and we can take down the slide now, our project is really an attempt to answer what had been thought of Hasidism by earlier scholars. The names Simon Dubnow, Martin Buber, Gershom Scholem may well be known to you. These are scholars from the first part of the 20th century who all worked on Hasidism. And in general, although they disagreed on many issues, they all thought that Hasidism was a kind of romantic revolt against rabbinic legalism in the 18th century, a movement of the, so to say, the lower classes, the uneducated, a movement that very much focused on nature, on a kind of prayer whenever one chose to, rather than following set times. A movement characterized by joy, dancing, singing. Some of this, of course, is true. Certainly, the importance of joy in Hasidism cannot be minimized. But our project argues actually something quite different, that Hasidism actually arose within a certain kind of elite religious class within Polish Jewish society. The Baal Shem Tov, thought to be the founder of Hasidism, although he probably never intended to found a movement. The Baal Shem Tov was not a man on the fringes of his society. He was rather, as Moshe Rossman, one of the members of our project, has shown, was actually a functionary of his community of Medjugorje. He was a Kabbalist, which meant that he specialized in writing amulets for those who had diseases or wanted to get married. These amulets were, of course, very important in Polish Jewish society, and he was an expert in writing them. So he received a house for free. He did not pay taxes, and we know this from the community tax rolls of his community. He gathered around him a kind of a circle, not so much of disciples, but of kind of colleagues who were interested in his teaching. And one thing that we can say with some certainty is that he preached against the kind of ascetic characteristics of the Polish Jewish elite, the Biale Shem, or the magicians or shamans, people who called themselves Hasidim, by which they meant the pious. And these were people who tormented their bodies, sat in a river, icy river in the winter, and in the summer would sit on an anthill if they believed they committed sins. So the Baal Shem Tov, in a very famous letter to one of his followers, Yaakov Yosef of Poloi, warns against such behavior and says, no, you should worship God with joy. And this indeed is one of the hallmarks of Hasidism. We have even accounts from the Warsaw Ghetto, where Emanuel Ringelblum, the historian of the ghetto, reports witnessing Hasidim whose family members had just been deported and murdered, and they were dancing with joy. This is a very interesting part of the movement. Now, of course, because Hasidism is a complicated movement of movements of many different groups, you can't say that Hasidism is one thing. And this is an important, I think, aspect of our work, is to argue that many different Hasidic groups had different kind of philosophies, different theologies, different approaches to life. The Baal Shem Tov dies in 1760, and following that, one of his followers, the Maggid of Mesrich, Dov Ber, acquires a circle of followers, and now they begin to use the word Hasidim, or Hasid, singular, to mean something quite different from simply pious. A Hasid is now also a follower of, a Hasid of a Rebbe, of a teacher or a charismatic leader. This is a new meaning to the word. In modern Hebrew, you can use the term Hasid to mean a follower as well, even if it has nothing to do with religion. So the Maggid of Mesrich develops this circle of followers. He is the first to encounter opposition to Hasidism. The great scholar, the Gaon of Vilna, promulgates a ban on Hasidism, and it would appear that in reaction to this ban, Dov Ber and his disciples begin to see themselves actually as a movement. And it's after his death in 1772 that his various followers go out and establish Hasidic courts in different places in Ukraine, White Russia, and Poland. So the movement starts actually very small, probably in the 18th century. We're talking in the thousands at the very most of Hasidim. But for the earlier scholars of Hasidism, the Hasidic movement enjoyed its golden age in the 18th century. We argue differently. We argue that, in fact, the golden age of Hasidism is the 19th century. It is the time when Hasidism now is transformed from a very small movement into a mass movement. It spreads, and we'll hear about this more from Marcin. It spreads widely into various areas of Poland, of Ukraine. It becomes indeed a movement of the Jewish masses. And it is during the 19th century that Hasidism acquires a new kind of characteristic, and that is opposition to modernity. Hasidism becomes one of the bulwarks against modernization as it begins to infiltrate into the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe. And this is, of course, one of the characteristics of Hasidism that we know today. It's staunch refusal of modernity. There are differences between different Hasidic groups. For example, Chabad Lubavitch is a partially modern movement. Other groups far less so. But this is a characteristic they begin to develop in the second half of the 19th century. The final issue that I want to raise from our study moves us forward to the Holocaust and the post-Holocaust period. Of course, the Hasidim suffered enormously during the Holocaust. Most of their members were murdered. And yet after the war, Hasidism enjoys a tremendous renaissance. It's like a phoenix which rises from the ashes. To the point that today, and we don't know exact numbers, but it's possible that there's some 750,000 Hasidim today, a very large number compared to what it was at the very end of the war. How did this happen? This is a question we ask ourselves, and I have to say we still don't know the answer. Hasidism does manage to rebuild in part because some of the major Hasidic leaders, the Rebbes, managed to survive. The Rebbe of Ger manages to get to the land of Israel. Rebbe of Lubavitch escapes from Warsaw to Riga, from there to the United States. The leader of Satmar, Yoel Teitelbaum, is rescued, ironically, by the Zionists. He was staunchly anti-Zionist, but they nevertheless rescue him. And he then establishes himself eventually in New York. And these leaders now begin to rebuild and to recruit among usually survivors of the Holocaust, not necessarily people who had been Hasidim before. And they build an enormous infrastructure, primarily in Israel and in North America, with outposts in England, Australia, Canada. But this is a remarkable story of Renaissance, to the point today where they really are a political power, both in Israel and in the United States. So this is a story that we try to tell in our book. We span a couple hundred years of history, but we didn't manage to cover everything. Of course, there are definite problems or lacunae, holes in our argument. And one of them that I would like to point to, and it's why we're very fortunate to have Chen on this seminar, is that we did not treat in an intensive way the Hasidic tale. We, of course, discuss the Hasidic tale. We give a few examples. We discuss the new literature in the 1870s of Hasidic tales, but we did not do a literary analysis. We do not really delve into the folklore in these tales, partly because we were all historians and we discussed this actually in our group, we felt ourselves not adequate to do so. And so this is some area of scholarship that, of course, deserves much more attention. So thank you very much. And I now pass, I think, Chen, you're going to be the next to speak.
Yes, but if you don't mind, I would like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that you described how Hasidism became anti-modern in the second half of the 19th century. But in your book, at the very beginning, you state that Hasidism was indeed a modern movement, which is very accepted among scholars these days. So I would like to hear more from you, how you settle those two elements or characteristics of the Hasidic movement, which was indeed a modern movement. This is something that I argue from a literary perspective. But
yes, thank you. Thank you. That's a great question, a relevant one for sure. I think our argument is that it's several-fold. First of all, that even anti-modernism really is a part of modernity. That is, you can't oppose modernity without being part of it. And so this dialectic between the modernizers and the anti-modernizers is one that characterizes Hasidism. And for that reason, it's certainly part of the modern world. Scholars have shown that modernity is not only limited to secularization. Modernity is, in fact, an age in which religion enjoys a kind of renaissance in a new way. Hasidism is certainly part of that. And so it has to be counted as part of this much more complex phenomenon of modernity than simply secularization. In addition, the Hasidim learn how to use modern politics. They become very adept at it. Already in Russia, and this is something we discuss, and certainly more recently in the state of Israel and in the United States, they've learned how to use modern political tools in their own self-interest. And so I think that Hasidism does have to be counted as a modern movement. I'm glad you raised the question. It was actually very interesting that in our introduction, we make this argument, and we were attacked by some people who said, no, this is a medieval, superstitious, obscurantist movement, and there's nothing modern about it at all. So I think you're right that scholars were not surprised by our argument, but I think some people from the more general public were.
Hi. Thank you, David. I apologize for my unstable internet. So yes, following this new development in the study of Hasidism and the question of Hasidic modernity, in the realm of Hebrew literature, where I'm coming from, no one considers Hasidic literature as a modern literary product because it was very too religious, very superstitious. Do you hear me well?
There's some interference.
Yeah, we hear you, plus something else from the background. Possibly.
Some static.
How about now? Is that okay?
It is perfect, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's an internet problem.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Anyway, what I will try to show that is that Hasidism was involved and engaged in modern ideas, not only modern tools, but also modern values such as the idea of the individual representing the masses that became a political entity in the mid-19th century when the Habsburg Empire, especially in Galicia, granted emancipation to its subjects. So the story of Hasidic literature begins in 1814 with the publication of Shivchei HaBesht, the archetype of Hasidic literature. This is a hagiographical work that basically it means that it praises the deeds of saints. Is now better? Better now? Okay. And it describes the lives of the saint. In our case, is the Baal Shem Tov, the person who is considered to be the founder of the Hasidic movement. And this was a very popular work that was distributed in thousands of copies and was translated. It was written first in Hebrew, then in Yiddish. But I don't want to focus about this moment because following the publication of Shivchei HaBesht, we have 50 years in which no other collections of Hasidic stories were printed. Almost no other collections were printed. But then all of a sudden in the mid-19th century, we have this boost of Hasidic publication of booklets containing stories about saints, about Hasidim. As you can see from the numbers, if Jacob will present the next slide. Thank you. So this is becoming a very, very intense culture. And I tried to think why all of a sudden in the mid-19th century we have this boost of printing. This is happening mostly in Lemberg, in Lviv, under the Habsburg Empire in Galicia. And following other scholars and learning more about the historical context of this time and period, I found two things. First of all, we have influences of capitalist economy and new technologies that are coming to Galicia from the West. So now printing is becoming much more accessible. It's cheap. You can do it on a large scale. And the second thing that I found very interesting is that from the 1848 revolution, the Spring of Nation, there's a growing awareness among the masses in Galicia and minority groups in Galicia about their own culture, their folkite, and they're receiving more and more rights from the state to express their culture. So Jews were not different. They were different slightly because they were not recognized officially by the state. But they're starting to print. We have new newspapers printed in Lemberg in this period. And obviously, Hasidim did not lag behind. They also printed a large amount of booklets that were printed again and again in different editions and different languages. In parallel to this Hasidic literary culture, we have obviously the Maskilim, the adherents of the Jewish Enlightenment, who could not tolerate this literature because they perceived it as the opposite of what they perceived to be modernity. They thought it would prevent the masses from moving towards progress and modernization of society. And I want to read one quote from this time and period. This is a quote by Alexander Zederbaum, who was a leading figure of the Jewish Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment in Eastern Europe. And he writes this. I want to read this and discuss it a little bit. So there are already authors publishing ancient, according to them, manuscript or new fictions of their own creation and printings that have been sanctified, such that the masses will believe that everything that comes out of it is holy. And they make a commodity out of it and print such books by the thousands and tens of thousands in a watered-down Hebrew or in crazy or disoriented Yiddish on grubby paper in order to be sold cheaply by booksellers making the rounds through the cities and villages. And so they will spread through the masses and the women fake stories and miracles that did not exist and never happened. And that's enough for us. But what bothers Zederbaum and other Maskilim, he's not alone, obviously. We have Yosef Perl, we have Ephraim Deinert and others. What bothers him is, first of all, the content of the stories, which is too religious for him and a little bit mystical, irrational, right? The Enlightenment stressed rationalism and they couldn't tolerate this irrationality and fantastic plots of the Hasidic stories. He could not tolerate the lowbrow style of the stories, the language, the cheap paper, because up until this point, we have Maskilim printing mostly biblical, flowery novels or poems or allegorical dramas. Or we have the Maskilic satire, basically stories by Maskilim that represents the masses, represents Hasidim, but in a very flat way, mocking them, criticizing them, and not taking them seriously. And all of a sudden, we have this culture that they could not tolerate, and they felt obliged to respond to it. But what is more important from this quote is that we can see how significant this literature was. It was basically one of the first formats of leisure, of free time, reading for pleasure. It was indeed religious to some extent, but it was many of the authors write at the introduction to those booklets that people should read them when they're idle from studying Torah. So when they're not studying the Holy Scripture, and they can basically read them for pleasure. We see Zederbaum claiming that even women read them. So we have this obviously modern culture of free time, reading for pleasure. This is the first thing. And the second thing that we have here, which is extremely important, is the fact that we have Hasidim representing themselves. We can look into how Hasidim wanted to create or represent their own ethos as a collective, representing the masses. We have here the needs of people, their emotions, their anxieties, the rituals taken seriously for the first time in literature. So people could read them and feel that someone reflects them and their needs and their fears. Obviously, it reconstructed a sense of communality. Obviously, it had some sense of controlling and supervising the people and organizing them under the character of the tzaddik. But we have here something that gave people a sense of approval, self-representation, and reading for pleasure. So I can speak more about this, how in these stories Hasidim reacted to ideas such as the individual, which is a new category in modern time, especially in the 19th century. But I will leave that if people have questions later. But there is one more thing that I want to mention here, which is important in the study of this literature, is that in the last couple of years, there's a group led by Gadi Sagiv, and Marcin is also part of it, and Uriel Gelman is also part of it, who are aiming to take all those Hasidic stories and digitize them and make them accessible through the digital platforma, and also use digital tools and methodologies to analyze the stories and see. And I'm very excited to see what we will be able to extract from such a methodology, because the Hasid representing himself is not something that was taken seriously, even not in the world of in the literary field. Because again, embracing the perception of the Haskalah, this literature was perceived as unmodern. And I want to argue that it was modern, but very popular, maybe lowbrow culture, but very modern. So Marcin, I'm sure you can speak more about this digital project and in general about the use of digital methodologies in the study of Hasidism.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's very thank you for this introduction to what is my focus. But before I get to this, I would like you to point actually to all the listening something that I think is very indicative of both our book Hasidism New History and what is happening with research on Hasidism, what you presented in your take on the Hasidic stories. We had obviously some research on Hasidic tales, starting with Martin Buber, taking it into kind of homiletic or semi-homiletic literature, philosophical literature, and all other remaking of this. But what you presented, the point is about studying Hasidism in interaction. We cannot understand literature of Hasidism if we don't understand how it functions with other elements of the society, how it comes into dialogue, discourse, conflict sometimes with other takes on literature or other forms of cultural expression. I think it's very interesting, even if at some points I'm not sure that I follow you, because I'm not sure I agree with how far what you say about not Hasidim, about the masculine is representative for the Jewish Enlightenment. When you say Sederbaum or Perl, you talk about extremists. You are not talking about the mainstream Haskalah. The conflict might be so extreme on the outskirts, on the extreme of Haskalah, of those Maskilim who are strongly anti-Hasidic, but possibly many Maskilim, or maybe the vast majority of the Maskilim, who were kind of midway, moderate. They never raise interest of historians, because we historians always crave for something that is extreme, that is really putting things into conflict, because conflict sells well, right? So about this, I'm not so sure if the picture would be the same. And also, on the other hand, when you present this conflict between Haskalah and Hasidism, and I studied this conflict a bit too, so I know why it is capturing, why it's so fascinating. Today, you ask an average Israeli and they replicate the same cliches that you can read in the literature in early 19th century. So this is obviously very much alive. But at the same time, when we get back about the literature of the mid-19th century, when we are talking about this race, is this the real opposition, or the main core opposition would be, if you count by numbers of the Hebrew books published at that time, it wouldn't be Maskidic versus Hasidic. It would be possibly rabbinical literature versus Hasidic, maybe. So that, you know, the main opposition line might be a bit elsewhere. But that's my question to you, how you see it.
So when I started to study this topic, I looked from the perspective of literary historiography. And there you don't have this conflict between Maskilim and Hasidim, because not many people work on Hasidic literature, but you look into what was perceived canonical works of the period. And most of the works are indeed a biblical, flowery literature. Even if they did not reject the Hasidic texts, they also did not accept it as valuable in terms of the literary style and content. What we do see is that from the 1880s or so, writers are beginning to embrace some of the style of Hasidic literature, to the extent that Biale at a certain point said that Mendeley invented the Hebrew style of mixing Hasidic, rabbinic, Aramaic words or sentences and styles together. But basically, this is a Hasidic style of writing, and it was very modern, but it was accepted as modern only when canonical figures used it in a way that was not too religious and easier for modernized people to accept and embrace. And if you see the project of Martin Buber, he totally, in my perspective, ruined Hasidic literature. He took it, he translated it, and changed the whole language and format of the texts themselves. So he basically created something for modern people so they could relate to these texts as something that is would be part of their historical, the collective history. Did I answer your question?
Thank you. Actually, I'm not sure we don't need to answer, but I think that's fascinating what you're talking. To me, as I understand it, it means get rid of the canon, actually, because the problem is the canon, what we perceive, what is presented as canonical, and why things are outside. I very much identify with your point, because what we are doing now in Poland is preparing a huge collection of Hasidic stories. It will be 600 pages of anthology of Hasidic stories in Polish translation, in the beautiful edition of the longest book series existing in Europe from 1925, continuously publishing the canon of Polish literature. And now in the canon of Polish literature, we publish a collection of Hasidic stories. It's exactly the same concept. Down with the canon. We need a new canon. We cannot agree for the hierarchies that were imposed on our understanding of what is modern or what is not. The same way, my understanding of what is happening in study of Hasidism is also that we are trying to think critically about the source basis and methodologies that we apply to this. And when you get to this, very clearly you see that the vast majority of study on Hasidism was based on Hebrew texts, mostly rabbinic literature, and it was within the field of the history of ideas, joy in Hasidism, concept of unio mystica, dveikus in Hasidism, and on and on. And I think that what we managed to do in the book Hasidism New History, and I believe what is maybe most exciting in what is the new study of Hasidism, is going beyond this very stereotypical canon of rabbinical texts of Hasidism into other types of sources. And Hen, you describe beautifully Hasidic stories and how they change our understanding, but I would like to bring something that might be even more radical, in a sense that we don't need to stick to texts at all. I would like to point to the fact that we can study Hasidism through methods that are taken from other disciplines that use, for example, space or sociological categories, that use corpus of texts, but all as a corpus, not as a text, for statistical analysis, for example. And if you allow me, I hope to give you at least two very short examples. But for those two examples, I need to explain why I think it is important to use this kind of methodologies. And allow me also for kind of personal note. I started my interest in Hasidism, well, very long time ago, very, very long time ago. And it took me some time to try to conceptualize why it was so capturing for me in Hasidism. And I think this is an important question for all of us to respond. What is so important? What is significance of Hasidism? I believe it's very easy to say Hasidism is unique on many levels, on many counts, but in order to understand uniqueness, you need to compare it to others. And for this, you need to use comparable research tools to see when you have such a phenomenon in X, on Y, on Z, you have in Hasidism something that is similar, but at the same time unique, at the same time exceptional. And that's why I think that this is what is happening in scholarship on Hasidism today, is putting Hasidism in the same conceptual categories at which we are trying to understand Shinto or Buddhism, or we are trying to understand all other religiosities globally, not only in Judaism, but also globally, and try to apply the same tools. Let me give two, or if I have enough time, three examples for three different questions. First, if we want to understand what is a relation between tzaddik and his followers, very simple. Jakub, if you could present the image. What is a relation? We know Hasidic literature is presenting a kind of conceptual frame for this. What is the root, the shoresh of the soul, Adam Kadmon, that goes from Adam Kadmon through tzaddik to the Hasidim. They establish community that is unified by certain field. But then I was trying to understand, this is within the language of Hasidism. But if we want to understand what are other parameters connecting tzaddik and his followers, can we trace any other regularities? Who is becoming a follower of the Gerer Rebbe and who is becoming a follower of the Alexander Rebbe? They live 100 kilometers from each other, right? How can we differentiate them? Is this anything specific about their spirituality, organization of the community, or maybe it's something about the space? Can we get next slide? And for this, I decided to do a very simple thing, to see how far Hasidim live from the Rebbe. What is the distance between a tzaddik and the people, not maybe actually his Hasidim, people that bring kvittel, the petition at which they ask something from the Rebbe. Unfortunately, we don't have too many kvittel, but we have one beautiful collection. It's a bit complicated because this is collection that was submitted to Eliyahu Gutmacher of Grodzisk Wielkopolski, and Eliyahu Gutmacher, he never claimed to be the Rebbe, but he was treated as the Rebbe by people coming to him. And I compared the kvitlech brought to him. It's almost 7,000 of those kvitlech. They are structurally the same as for those who come to the Rebbes in central Poland or in Russia, in Galicia. Beautifully, all the kvitlech start, and you can see it on the image, they start with the name of the locality from which they come. So I didn't have to read all of the kvitlech, I had to read only the first word of each of them, 7,000, and put them on the map. And I did. The next image gives this. So you have the circles. You see Grodzisk in the middle. That's where Grajdica Rebbe lives. He lives in Germany. So that's one of the issues that differentiate him. If you look on this map and you see the circles, the size of the circle is the number of kvitlech coming to Grodzisk. The color of the circle is the percentage of families in this town bringing the kvitel to the Grodzisk. So actually the important information is not the size of the circle, because obviously Warsaw or Łódź are big, but the color, meaning what is the percentage of people living in given a community that identify with Grodzisk. And on this map, you can see three beautifully interlinked phenomena. Phenomena about space and spirituality, which I think is fascinating here. First of all, you see so-called distance delay effect. Speaking simply, if you are close, it's much easier to travel to the Rebbe than when it's far. And it's obviously nothing surprising, but you can very clearly trace that communities that are the closest have biggest percentage of people coming to Grodzisk. Second of all, and that's even more interesting, which I think is the importance of railroad for spirituality, you can see that certain lines of those communities, the darkest, are located along those small lines that are showing railroads of mid-19th century. So actually you see that people are using railroads to come to the Rebbe. So in other sense, it's not space as such that was important. It's social space. It is importance of space calculated by time of travel, safety, and convenience of traveling, and not only space measured by miles or kilometers. And third of all, you have certain yellow or orange dots that are located very far from the center, from Grodzisk, which are very surprising. You don't know why you get so far. You have Warsaw, which is the biggest green bubble, right? But on the right side of Warsaw, you have this orange bubble, very small locality, from which you have huge number of people, every fourth family bringing kvitel to Grodzisk, which is surprising. Well, one of the factors is obviously railroads, but there's also something more. And this is something which I called chain miracle. You have the chain migration, that is the phenomenon about people traveling from when there is an immigration. People move from, say, Russia to United States, and if you have somebody coming from Kovel to Buffalo, all other Jews from Kovel will go to Buffalo and not to New York, because they have somebody to connect. This is called chain migration. And here you have very parallel phenomenon, namely, if somebody from a locality came to Grodzisk, maybe by chance, just passing the town, just brought a kvitel, and the miracle happened. And I'm not arguing whether this miracle was objective or subjective, whatever. This person comes back home and says, this is the great Rebbe. What happens at that place? This is exactly chain migration, because people at this locality will have tendency to bring their kvitel to other place. Next concept that I would like to show you with next slide refers to something that lies at the core of our understanding of Hasidism, which is so-called Hasidic conquest. We know that Hasidim conquered Eastern Europe, and there were thousands and thousands of them. We don't know how many Hasidim they are really now. And David already mentioned 750,000, and this is one of the findings that I would like to discuss here, because when I was preparing my historical atlas of Hasidism, from which I take those images, I was searching for a number, and actually no source gives the number for contemporary Hasidism. I thought it's so easy. We have so much of sociological research on Hasidism. Why is it so? Nobody counted how many Hasidim there really are. And I believe this is very essential information for understanding of what is the social nature. It's very different when a community is, say, 100,000 people, or it is 2 million people, because interactions within this community take totally different forms. So I was trying to find numbers, and I couldn't. I found many reasons why sociologists believed it is impossible to count them, but not real numbers. And so what I did was, again, coming to this to numbers, to trying to understand how many they are by counting Hasidic telephone directories. Next slide, if I could ask. As some of you might know, individual Hasidic groups publish, and especially the big and mid-sized groups, publish their internal Hasidic telephone directories, and this is a kind of membership list because it's very important. On the one hand, it's very important to be part of this list. On the other hand, it is a kind of control between the groups that know there's no inflation, not other people added. So altogether, I calculated this, and here we come to, and I see I'm far beyond my time. So last image, I came to the number of between of 129,000 Hasidic families worldwide, which translates into something between 750,000 Hasidim worldwide, which gives us something between 4 and 5% of the core Jewish population globally. And most interestingly, for the biggest concentration of the Hasidic life in the United States, Canada, and Israel, the average population, it's between 4 and 5%. This is very important for anybody that heard about Hasidim conquering a life of contemporary Israel or something about Hasidic flood, how dangerous it is. It is between 4 and 5%. The bigger number is for United Kingdom, where it's almost 10%. And very interestingly, the community with the biggest percentage of the Hasidim among the Jewish community there is Belgium, because every third Belgian Jew is Hasidic. So this is about the numbers and what the numbers allow us to understand about Hasidic life in history and today. Thank you.
So, David, Chen, Marcin, thank you for kind of giving us a hologram approach. I think you've really stimulated a lot of questions and comments, and perhaps very quickly, I would ask David if you want to respond or have any questions for Marcin, and then we'll go to 1 or 2 questions from our audience. David?
Turn on your mic, please. David.
I can't.
We can hear you. All good. All good.
Now you can. Okay. Yeah. I can't control my mic. It's being controlled by someone in Warsaw.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to emphasize for Marcin's presentation something that really is very unique in Jewish history, what we find in Hasidism, and that is this social structure of a charismatic leader with followers who are geographically dispersed, sometimes at a great distance. And of course, what Marcin has shown is different modes of transportation. That is, once the railroad appears, then the tzaddik, the Rebbe, can have a much larger reach. The airplane makes it even greater. As anyone can attest who flies from New York to Israel, or vice versa, the number of Hasidim on the plane. So this social structure is really remarkable. There are some parallels in Moroccan Jewish history, modern Moroccan Jewish history, of the role of the wonder-working saint and followers. But in terms of earlier Jewish history, we really don't find anything quite like this. And in that sense, quite apart from its ideas, Hasidism is really characterized by this a new type of geographical reach, and this really has radically transformed the Jewish world in terms of locality. So I think this is a great contribution of Marcin's work. Thank you for that.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Chen. Let's take a question from someone in your neighborhood, actually, David, Sue Fishkoff, who asked the question, speaking of sociology, how does historical research into Hasidism dialogue with sociological research, specifically the effect of Hasidic religious practice might be having on other Jewish streams beyond Chabad and beyond North America?
Yeah, so this is really interesting that at the same time that Hasidism entrenches itself in a kind of fortress guarding against the modern world, it doesn't quite work that way. That is, there are various ways in which Hasidic ideas are picked up by others. The whole movement of neo-Hasidism that we see in different places in the Jewish world, in which people like Shlomo Carlebach, Zalman Schachter Shlomi, translate, at least, or they filter or translate certain Hasidic ideas into a kind of New Age Judaism. And that's one way in which Hasidism continues to have some kind of impact. The other way, actually, not so much in terms of sociology, but in terms of culture, that Hollywood is fascinated, obsessed, one might even say, with Hasidim. And there are all of these, both documentary and feature films, which look at the Hasidic world. Unfortunately, in my view, they're primarily obsessed with people who leave rather than people who stay. For example, the film Unorthodox, which many have probably seen, based on a memoir of someone who left. But this gives you the impression, actually, that this is a rigid world in which the people who stay inside are fanatics and only some dare to leave. And I think this is a very unfortunate. I mean, I'm not a Hasid, I'm not a religious Jew at all, but I think that it's crucial for us to understand what it is within these communities that continue to hold their followers. And it's not just fear of leaving. It's, by the way, I'd like to recommend, for those who may not know it, a podcast by Naomi Seidman called Heretic in the House, which is all about the question of leaving, and makes it actually very complicated. It's much more complicated than meets the eye from these Hollywood productions. So there are various ways in which Hasidism is still, very much part of modern culture, even as it resists modernity.
Marcin or Chen, would you like to add to?
I'd like to add a sentence, maybe not about the contemporary, how far historical research is coping with the concept of how today Hasidism is interacting with other streams of Judaism, but rather what was interaction between Hasidism and others, and not only non-Jews, but also with other communities living in Eastern Europe historically. And I think I was trying to point to this aspect in response to what Chen presented. I think that's one of the biggest changes that is happening today, is taking knowledge from sociology to apply into historical research about the boundaries, about social interaction. The issue of women and Hasidism is one of those that is using sociological concepts to understand what was historically relation between women and Hasidism and how it is changing. Also about Hasidim and non-Jews, Hasidim and other Jews, what are the concepts? So I would say that sociology is very much present here. I was writing, for example, about so-called sectarian paradigm of Hasidism. So in a way, how we use sociological category of the sect, not of the new religious movement, of the sect, and how stigmatizing it is in our understanding of what historical relations between Hasidim and non-Hasidim were, and actually how it redesigns actual social boundaries that Hasidim had historically within their community. So I believe this is very much within it, and I think that's something that is happily happening very much in research on Hasidism. It's exactly this stronger inclusion of sociological and other interdisciplinary methods into research on Hasidism. Hasidism today is not only the issue for historians to study, it's also for literary historians, sociologists, anthropologists, and other. And it is not the division that sociologists deal with contemporary Hasidism and historians with history, but there's a lot of exchange in tools, sources, and methods.
Marcin, thank you. Chen, I see you're eagerly engaged. Please share.
I was thinking about this question recently because I started to work on women writing, when women as readers in Hasidism. It's not very easy to access and reach information about women within Hasidic circles. But what I found is that many female Hasidot or Hasidah, there is a big question and a big discussion among scholars whether it is possible for women to practice Hasidism, to be a Hasidah or not. There are a lot of answers to these questions. And in terms of literature, what I found is that there aren't many Hasidot within Hasidic stories. They are not represented as much. There are even smaller number of Hasidic writers, female writers. But recently, in the, I don't know, maybe the last decade, there are a lot of Hasidic writers and ultra-Orthodox writers in Israel who write popular literature. And they are among the top sellers in Israel. And this is a very, it's a beginning of a research, but what I think I might find is that female Hasidot will have to exceed the borders of the Hasidut in order to find tools and using them to redefine themselves as Hasidot. So the interaction of female Hasidot with the outside world will help, it's intuitive, but will help them to redefine themselves as members of Hasidism. So the question, the social question, the sociologist question about women in Hasidism is extremely important. And I think there is still a lot of work to be done there.
I would like to add a small sentence here before David knows how to turn on his mic. I was faster. Because in what you are saying, it's very interesting. You are talking about small presence of Hasidic authors, female Hasidic authors, but you are talking about, again, canonical genres. If you go into non-canonical genres like Yigo documents about memoir literature, then it's huge presence of the first and the best and the most important Hasidic memoirs come from women.
Right.
And this,
but when many of them,
it's much easier for them to be there on the outskirts of what is non-canonical, what is not so central, which is not so prestigious.
Right. And some of them begin by writing such literature, and then after they're being recognized and approved, they go on to write love stories and other types of fiction.
So I think it's very important what we can conclude from this discussion specifically of women, but it can be generalized beyond this, that Hasidim are not monolithic. There are women who choose to write. They may have to use tools from the outside. They're not all the same. In other words, not all women within Hasidism or not all Hasidim, male Hasidim, are the same. There is variety. This is a heterogeneous movement, even within a particular Hasidic court. And this is, I think, an extremely important point. I wanted to tell one amusing anecdote about the issue that Chen raised. You know, are women considered Hasidot, that is, full-fledged members of the Hasidic world today? So in our team, one member of the team argued really vociferously, women are not considered Hasidot. They are considered wives of Hasidim. Another member of our team argued the opposite. No, they are considered full members. So how do we resolve this controversy? So the person who argued that they are in fact Hasidot said, he had the email of the Gabbai of the Munkacher Rebbe. So he sent him an email. He said, are women Hasidot? Within 30 seconds, he had a response, yes. So now this did not convince the member of our team who argued against this, but it convinced all the rest of us. And I think that in the 19th century, I think there's a great deal of controversy. I think by the time we get to contemporary times, in my view, there really should not be that much controversy. And in fact, there's a YouTube of, I think it's from Belz or maybe it's from Vishnitz, I can't remember, of a Rebbitzin holding a tish with men. In other words, she is taking the role of a tzaddik at the head of the table. The member of our team who argued against women having such a role said even he had to agree that this was remarkable.
And
So-
exceptional also. And exceptional.
So I
Exceptional,
don't,
yes, exceptional, but the point is that the exception shows you that the boundaries are much wider than we tend to think.
But do you think it's true for the common Hasidah or to the daughter of an Admor or to the wife of an Admor? We know in Kuznets it's easy, right? You have Malka Shapira, you have other dominant figures. But
In Belz in the 19th century,
common Hasidah practice what common Hasid practice? Or this might not be the right question. Tzipi Kaufman already undermined such discourse, but I don't know. I'm asking about the social status of female within the Hasidic movement. Does it or does it not affect her ability to be a Hasidah or not a Hasidah?
So certainly in the 19th century, we have examples of women who were related to the tzaddikim, who played the role of tzaddikah. We have a number of such examples. These are truly exceptional examples. I would say today, the issue really is, well, the one you just raised, Chen. What exactly is the status and role of a woman who is not close to one of the courts? And how do they self-identify? And I think the way they self-identify is probably more and more that they are Hasidot. Now, what does this mean in daily practice? Obviously, they are excluded. This is a patriarchal society with a hierarchy. Nevertheless, they are expected, I think, to have some kind of a similar religious experience to that of men. And this, of course, requires much more research.
I don't want to stop this incredible conversation, which is amongst the three of you. We have a very engaged audience, among them Professor Moshe Rossman, among others, but I want to conclude, if I may, with a few things. One, there's been a request that we have yet another session. And so kol hakavod to all of you. We look forward to hosting you again on a TJHT talk. But one woman who says the following, speaking to our last part of our conversation: as a Hasidic woman who has interviewed many women in my community, I can tell you that my peers very much see themselves as Hasidim. So we would like, on behalf of TJHT Talks of the Lehrhaus and the Toby Department of Jewish Studies at Wrocław University, to thank all of you for joining us. In particular, thank you, David, Marcin, and Chen. You are leaving us with more questions, which is obviously our goal. We hope to be able to host you again. And we look forward, we want to thank you, audience, for your being with us, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing all of you in March at the next edition. I would say good night, being in Warsaw, but may it be a good day for those who are starting. And toda raba. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.